Okay, let's get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Andy Romano. I'm the founder and co-owner of Prep101. And what I'd like to do in this video is take you, an MCAT prep instructor, through the orientation for students. So you're going to be the speaker or presenter, whatever you want to call it, in the two orientations for students, three in Edmonton and Toronto U of T St. George. And just give you some tips and pointers as to some of the things that we'd like you to highlight during the orientation, and some of the administrative or logistical things will be going on through the orientation, which is only 2 hours. So let's just jump right in. So first thing is the materials that will be handed out to students at the orientation. So when you arrive, you should see a table outside the classroom with a Prep101 representative handing out course outlines and also miscellaneous other items to students arriving. The key here is that you understand the course outline was not included in the package of materials that was sent to students when they registered for the course. We used to do it that way, but then they all forget to bring it to the orientation, so we now hand it out at the orientation. And what that means is they haven't had a chance to look through it at all. They'll have a few minutes before you start speaking, but you should assume zero familiarity on their part with what's in the course outline. So that's important to take note of. What you should bring to the orientation, you should bring your own copy of the course outline. Here it's important to note that the one that was in your instructor package is somewhat outdated. We would have added some extra content since then. So you can always grab one from the helper who's handing them out outside of the class if you want a more updated one. Or we can send you the PDF while you have this file, or you can get this file printed. I'll send you the updated version at the same time that we send you this video. So it'll be the email that gives you the link to this video will have the updated course outline. You should bring a copy of the Exams Cracker Study Guide for your subject. If you're in bio, I would only bring one. You should bring the Prep101 Classroom Companion as well, because you're going to be showing the students those books and explaining how they use them. And then some manner of timekeeping device. It's usually a safe bet that whatever clock is in the classroom will not work. Okay? So let's go through a quick rough schedule. So in most places, the orientations are 5:30 to 7:30 on Tuesday and Friday evenings. And there's also morning sessions in, again, Edmonton and Toronto U of T St. George. Just make the adjustment. So instead of 5 p.m., it would be 10 a.m. for the morning sessions. So we want you to be there no later than 30 minutes before the start of the orientation. It's very important that you get in and get a chance to check out the AV, say hello to the course helper, make sure everything is all smoothly set up, and it looks like we're going to make a good first impression with students. So check your AV is working before the students arrive. Don't wait. Don't just look and see that it's there and think, oh, I'm sure it works, and then wait till everybody's in and then go to turn it on and realize, whoops, this isn't working. And then we have a bit of a mad scramble to start the course, and we're off to a less than auspicious beginning. So plan to start at 5:40. So plan to start 10 minutes late. This will be the only time in the entire 10-week course that we start late. Well, on purpose. We often start late by accident, but that's a different story. So plan to start at 5:40, and that's just because it's the first class. Students may have a little bit of a hard time finding the building, the room, to get the materials from the sign-in desk. If everybody shows up at the same time, it takes a few minutes for them to get whatever they need. It's key that you write. Orientation will start at 5:40, either on the screen or on the board, so students know you intend to start 10 minutes late. Otherwise, it looks disorganized. So make sure you write that. And also write your name and email address on the screen or board, as you should for your first classes as well. So those are the things you do before the students even get there. And then you can, if you want, you can go greet students. You can go through your notes. You can do whatever you want because you'll have 40 minutes before the orientation actually starts. So between 5:30 and 5:40, students will be filtering into the class. Advise them to look through the course outline before you start. And then at 5:40 sharp, you start. Okay, so, and as with any class, you'd want to have a personal introduction, a little bit of an icebreaker to get things off to a good start. Ask students to turn off their cell phones. Predict that the orientation will take around 2 hours. And this, again, just as it's the only class that will start late, it's the only class that will be less than 4 hours. You can sort of make this point here. The classes start at, weeknight classes start at 5:30 p.m. sharp, and morning classes start at 10:30 a.m. sharp. So again, with introducing yourself, name, education, teaching experience, you want to mention that you're one of a team of instructors who they'll be working with over the next 10 weeks, and the instructors' profiles are posted online. Actually, I'd be a little bit careful there because there's usually a bit of a lag. I would say the instructor profiles will be posted online. For the most part, returning instructors obviously are posted there, but we're still collecting pictures and profiles from new instructors, but hopefully we'll have everything up by the end of the first week of classes. Okay, mention that you plan to take a 10-minute break between the two sections of the course outline. That's the About Our Course, and then the second part is about the MCAT. And that you'll do about a 10-minute Q&A after the second part. And as you do during the course, tell the students you welcome their questions as long as it's relevant to the topic you're covering at that moment. But otherwise, if it's a more general question, it should be saved for the breaks and the Q&A at the end of the orientation. Okay, so 5:45 to 6:30, you take them through About Our Prep course, which is an 18-page section that I'll go through in just a second. Then you give them a 10-minute break, and then you come back at 6:40 to 7:30. You take them through the About the MCAT section and a very brief teaser introduction to tactics and traps. And then from 7:30 to, it says 8 o'clock here, but typically, and you're welcome to do the Q&A as long as you're comfortable doing it. Obviously, the students appreciate as much time as you can give them. But we have 7:30, 8 o'clock, the Q&A. Of course, if all the students leave, then you don't have to stick around. And also make a point of letting students leave. So some of them may not want to stick around for the Q&A, but they feel obliged if other people are asking questions to stay. So it's important that you say, hey, if I'm now open to questions. If some of you have rides waiting for you or whatever, you don't feel that you have to stay, you can go now, and I'll answer the questions of the remaining students. Okay. Just some general tips about how to be effective giving the orientation, most of which are true for teaching in general. Be thoroughly prepared. Sorry, there's a bit of redundancy in here, but hopefully this helps things stick in. Arrive 30 minutes early, double check AV is working before the orientation starts. Make a strong first impression and project 100% confidence in yourself. Most of you have been selected because you already have these attributes. Open with a preferably funny icebreaker. Really important as you're going through the orientation to tell anecdotes, especially when you get to about the MCAT part. To tell anecdotes about your personal experiences studying for and writing MCAT and applying to medical school. The students just lap that stuff up, and they'll just be riveted to your every word the more you incorporate that, and it's not just a dry presentation. And it's also good to include that kind of stuff while you're talking about our prep course, to say, boy, I wish I'd had access to this many practice materials when I was studying for the MCAT, or I wish I'd had in-class exams while I was studying. Just the features of the course that you can clearly see would have contribute positively to a good outcome MCAT score-wise for the students. Be candid about things you find difficult or struggled with on the MCAT, so that'll help with humanizing yourself, that they don't think you're some perfect robot up there, that you're, because you want to give them the sense that you've been where they've been. And you also found things difficult and struggled, and it's important that you convey that throughout the orientation, and it'll help you to build more of a rapport with the students. Take this seriously, but don't be serious. Have fun. So take it seriously, be professional, be prepared, convey the information effectively, but have fun. Make lots of jokes and play around with the kids, and we want the course to be something that they want to come to class. And that all fits into this stuff too. Be jovial, smile, make lots of eye contact, be approachable and relatable, move around, don't sit down, and modulate your voice. Again, that just helps with keeping students' attention. Regularly ask for feedback. The students at this point will be quite shy, so it's important that you're constantly asking them if they have any questions, and also that you keep asking them if everything is clear before you move on to the next section. Move briskly through the material, but speak at a moderate pace. You know, so you obviously wouldn't be speaking at the pace that I'm speaking right now. I know you're a very sophisticated audience, and the words are right in front of you too, and what I'm talking about is not complicated. But when you're doing the orientation, obviously you would speak at a much more moderate pace than I'm speaking at right now. And that feeds into the next one, don't go too fast. Continuously refer to page numbers in the course outline as you would in any teaching situation. Be firm but polite with questions with students who ask irrelevant questions. Again, usual standard reply. Brilliant question, not relevant to what I'm talking about right now. Let's talk about it later at the break, or better yet, during the Q&A. Build confidence in all aspects of our course. Again, really helpful as you're going through the features of the course to explain why they matter and why they help, especially when you get to the 4-step learning curve that we'll talk about a little bit later. When you talk about the in-class exams, which is something that students might be a little bit mystified by, why that would benefit them. They think it's more that we're checking up on them as opposed to that they're actually learning during the in-class exams. Encouraging students to follow our advice and our techniques, really, really important. So most of these kids have probably got friends who are also studying for the MCAT, either on their own or they're taking a prep course with another company. And they're reading a lot of stuff online that's going to be, in some cases, flat out contradicts what we recommend. So tell them you're taking this course, follow what we advise you. We've been doing this for 20 years. We know what works. Ignore everything else. And that also applies to their own techniques. So ignore outside advice, and as much as possible, adjust your own study habits to match what we recommend in this course, because it's been proven to work. Encourage students to work hard. The harder they work and the more practice questions they do, the better outcome they're going to have. It's just that simple. And then at the end, there's something you want to be conscious of throughout the orientation, of course, throughout the course as a whole, is you're going to get students in at least 2 different sort of diametrically opposed mindsets. One are those pessimistic students who really think the MCAT is impossible. They built it up in their head into this insurmountable hurdle that's going to block them from their ultimate dream of getting into medical school. And we all know that's not the case, that if you work hard and you can get a competitive score. And the problem with pessimistic students is they give up and they don't work hard enough. They don't think there's any point to working hard because they're not going to get to where they want to get to anyway, and therefore they kind of bail on themselves. So it's important to keep boosting their confidence, encouraging them to work that much harder. Then the other side of the equation is the overconfident students who've been getting great marks their entire lives, have always done well on any previous standardized test they've written without much effort. These ones you want to not intimidate, but maybe frighten them just a little bit. Because again, the problem if you're overconfident is you don't work hard enough. You think you're going to get, you can just coast to a great score. So those ones, you want to push them a little bit. Some of this will happen naturally because they'll do a practice or a simulated MCAT and suddenly realize that they're not going to magically get a great score just by showing up. But at the same time, you want to be conscious throughout the course of trying to building up the pessimistic students and maybe challenging the overconfident students just a little bit. Okay, so let's get into the prep course outline itself. At the beginning, there's a preface page with a little note from me, thanking the students for picking us. We know they have a lot of choices out there, and we think they've made a good one, and we'd like to thank them. My name's here, and my contact information, at least my work contact information, is here. And my main responsibility is general course design and improvement, misspelled improvement, but nonetheless. So I always welcome feedback from students about ways, and that obviously from you too, about ways we can improve the prep course, the materials, customer service, anything. But the main information on this page that students should take away is the head office contact information. So this is who they contact for general course administration and customer service. So if they have any questions, how do I get my practice test, codes? I can't log on to the student portal. I want to pay off my balance, but I can't remember how to do that. How do you get on the online forum? Just any of those standard things that wouldn't be for an instructor and don't relate to general course design. These are the numbers that they should be contacting. And this is new this year. We have an outside office hours sort of emergency number. You can actually call it during office hours as well, so it's not just outside office, but it will be, someone will be manning that line, hopefully at all times. So we're based in Toronto, so you'll notice the times here are all Eastern time, but there's a local number and also a 1-800 number. So during weekday office hours Eastern time, they call this number, and this number is basically, these numbers are 24/7. They call any time of the day, any time of the week. And then I put some of my colleagues down here as potential contacts if they want to contact us. Something new this year we put in is we've added the job notice or recruitment notice for MCPs that are MCAT course promoters. So these are students that we're hoping to hire for the upcoming academic year that will work. There's usually 2 per university, and they work to help promote our MCAT prep course at their university, mostly by promoting and running pre-med seminars, so mastering the MCAT, getting into med school. We may be developing a couple of new ones this year, though I say that every year and we haven't, but at least we have those 2, getting into medical school, which is about the admissions process and the application process, and mastering the MCAT, which is obviously about the MCAT. And so we need a couple of students to work on campus to help us do all of that. And it would really be helpful if you encourage the students to think about applying. It is a great thing to put on their resume or their application for medical school, because they're working with other pre-meds. They're helping out set up information seminars for pre-med students. So it's something that medical students look for a pretty wide array of background, skills, and experience, and this will be a helpful one for them. And it's also kind of a fun job, and doesn't demand a lot of time, pays reasonably well. You do get a letter of reference if you do a good job. So encourage them to apply, because to be honest, the best MCAT course promoters are students who've taken our course, who can actually say to prospective future students, listen, I took the course myself and it was really helpful. So that's why we want to hire as many of our actual students as possible. Okay, let's move on to the course outline itself. There is a lot of information in it, much too much information in it. You're only going to be covering selected snippets of it, and encourage students to read the whole thing from cover to cover after the orientation, because there actually is quite a lot of fairly useful information as well. So let's forward to the first page, page 4. So this is where we start talking. The first section is about our prep course. So I would start out by congratulating the students and make them feel good about themselves, that they've been clever enough to register in the most comprehensive MCAT prep course with the most balanced approach to enhancing your science knowledge, reasoning skills, and test-taking technique. And I think that's a factual statement. That's not a boast on our part. The other courses are structured very, very differently, and we'll talk about that in a second. Well, actually, we might as well talk about it now. So our course has 130 hours of classroom time, and it's pretty balanced between the review of science, so the basic knowledge that you need to succeed on the MCAT, and also prep for the passage-based format for the MCAT, the reasoning skills and technique that you need to do well, with a slight emphasis on the latter. So it's prep plus review with a slight emphasis on prep. Kaplan, their classroom course, there's only 36 hours of classroom time, and there's only one instructor who has to teach all of the subjects. So they focus on sort of skills and strategies. They don't even really try to teach that much in class, because obviously one instructor can't handle all the different subjects, so they have to stick to more general tips and strategies and so on. So it's basically self-study, and you get a lot of online resources to help you. And by the way, all of these courses are good. They're just different. And then Princeton Review, as the name would suggest, is more of a review than prep. approach. So it's 123 hours of classroom time, but the only covers usually one, sometimes two passages in each class, each 3-hour class. So it's really a review course to reteach you the science that's covered on the MCAT. Again, it's a good course. It just doesn't focus as much on doing practice passages. As you know, we'll cover usually a minimum of 4 and usually 8 passages per class. And then at the CARS workshops, we'll cover 12 to 14 passages per class. So we cover a lot of passages in class. Okay, talk about our course structure. So it's 130 hours of classroom instruction over 10 weeks, which includes an orientation, 44 lessons, 32 in-class exams, and 28 workshops, plus a lot of at-home study guides, reading, practice passages, and 13 full-length computerized practice tests. So there's a lot of components to the course. So we've broken the 130 hours down here into the various components. So this is the classroom in-person component of the course. And a few things to note here, that the short forms we use throughout the course, biochem, or biological sciences when we're referring to biology and biochemistry. Critical analysis and reasoning skills section, this should say, actually I guess this is subject, not section. So critical analysis, that's CARS, chemistry and organic chemistry, chem-ochem, physics, psychology and sociology, we just call psych-soc. So just some of the short forms. So you'll see in terms of lessons, we spend more time on biochem, and then we do on, say, some of the other psych-soc or chem-ochem or physics. Actually, it's a little bit deceptive here because these are lessons. Some of these lessons are 2 hours, so there's actually a lot more time than these numbers would indicate. So you'll see here that we have 14 lessons and 10 in-class exams in biochem, and we have 4 lessons, 4 in-class exams, and 12 workshops in CARS. So that's a big chunk of the course is taken up between biochem and CARS. And the reason for that is biochem and CARS account for over 50% of your score. The other topics are important, but don't contribute as much to your overall score. CARS is skewed towards workshops because there's no content to teach in CARS. You don't have any, it's not like the teaching physics where you actually have to teach the physics. So we do it mostly as workshops, just doing lots and lots of practice passages in the workshops. So in total, we have 44 lessons. So that's where we're covering the basic science covered on the MCAT. So this is the knowledge component of the course where we're imparting the key knowledge that you need. And then during the in-class exams and the workshops, that's where we're focused on the reasoning skills and test-taking techniques. So that's why I say it's fairly evenly balanced, but probably skewed if you add up the hours a little bit more towards these two, which we would call prep. And we make a note down here, only 35% of the questions on the science sections, obviously anything in blue is not in the student version. Only 35% of questions on the science sections test your science knowledge, whereas 65% test your reasoning skills, and 100% of CARS questions test reasoning skills. Actually, I would probably modify that if I could rewrite it. 30% test your just basic reading comprehension, and 70% test your reasoning skills. But either way, 65% of the science sections and 70% of the CARS section are testing your reasoning skills. That's why we've skewed our course to mastering reasoning skills and test-taking technique. And we do that through the in-class exams, workshops, and an absolute abundance of online practice materials that we'll come back to later. So you can see how the structure of the course is set up to facilitate for success for students. So we talked just now about the classroom component. Online, some of the digital components of the course. There's 23 after-class practice sets. So after each of the classes, except for CARS, there is a set of additional practice sets like the in-class exams, passage-based material, just on the topics covered in that particular class for students to work on. It's on their student portal. There's anywhere from 5 to 10 passages in each after-class practice set. And we're really presenting this as optional homework for students who choose to do it. We have so many passages available to them. These are sort of an add-on. So We don't want students to feel they have to do the after-class practice sets, but they're welcome to if they want to do some extra after-class practice on the topics that were just covered in an individual class. 13 full-length computerized practice tests. So there's 10 Altius practice tests, widely considered the best replications of real MCATs, and we've really done our research on that. And Altius itself has really done amazing research on the MCAT in order to produce very authentic replications. So we have 10 full-length Altius practice tests, which are a perfect replication, not just in content, but also in format and interface as the AAMC exams. And then we have the 3 official practice tests. There's actually another test called a sample test, but we don't use that one because it doesn't generate a score report. So we don't think it's as useful as the 3 official practice tests. So there's 13 practice tests. Then there's the 6 AAMC question packs, which is just a bunch more practice passages from old MCATs that are still considered relevant to the new MCAT, and that's mostly in the old subjects, biology, physics, GChem, OChem, and I feel like I'm missing one there. But and then there's the AAMC section bank, which mostly covers the newer topics, so biochemistry and psych-soc. So we give the students access to those as well. And then we also have 600 on-demand med reels. So that's the term we're using for the online videos that are on demand. Students can access through the student portal. So all 44 lessons in the classroom companions are covered in the med reels, and they're broken down into small chunks so students can go back and watch little bits. You know, if they don't want to watch the entire lesson, they just want to watch this little subsection, they can access it that way. And then all 16 science workshops are online as well. And the science workshops are actually instructors going through the AAMC question packs and the AAMC section bank. So the idea is the students would do this material on their own, and then they can watch an instructor go through it, and the instructor would demonstrate how the proper techniques to be used on these particular passages, questions, and answer choices. So the workshops, they used to be in the classroom, but now we've moved them online with the students doing the material first on their own, and then they can watch the instructors go through the material on med reels. So that's the question packs and the section bank. And those are just the science workshops, the 16 science workshops. The CARS workshops, there's 8 of them. They're still done in the classroom with an instructor using a workbook of practice passages, an exam crackers workbook. Okay, let's go on to the next page. So here we want to establish some terminology and help students understand the materials that are used in the course and a little bit about how they interrelate to one another. So as you're going through these, hold up a copy of each book. So first you would hold up your exam crackers study guide, whichever one you brought with you, and mention it's used for before class readings. So use it before class. You read the assigned lectures or chapters in the book, but they're called lectures in the table of contents. And you also bring it to class because we use it for the in-class exams, which obviously are done in class. And students should have 6 of them. Then there's the Prep101 classroom companions, and these are used for the in-class lessons. So you would also bring the appropriate classroom companion to class each time. If we're covering CARS, CARS class 2, you would bring your CARS study guide, and you would bring your CARS classroom companion. And again, there's 6 of them. They match up with the study guides, and you might even want to mention here that they reinforce the study guides, so they really follow one another quite closely. For CARS alone, there's the EK passages, 101 EK passages in MCAT verbal reasoning, and those are used for the CARS workshops. So for the CARS workshops, you don't need to bring study guides or classroom companions, you just bring your workbook, and we take you through some of the practice tests in there. And then already mentioned the AAMC and Altius test prep stuff that we include in the course. And those are mostly for at-home practice. And we recommend that most, boy, there's a lot of typos in here, my apologies. Most should be saved for the few weeks between the end of the prep course and your test date, when you will take up the practice test action plan. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. in the early part of the course, just focus on learning the science and doing the in-class exams. So learn the science and the lessons and the proper techniques in the in-class exams before you start jumping into the practice test. Learn the proper techniques first. So even if you already know the science, you're perfectly capable of going ahead and doing the practice test. We do recommend that you withhold or hold off a little bit until we've taught you some of the techniques that we recommend, so you can start applying those when you do your first practice test. But ultimately, the practice tests belong to the students. They can do with them what they choose. They can't do anything with them until week 3, because that's when we email the instructions to access and use the practice test. So we give the students a couple of weeks to just keep up with the readings and so on. And then in week 3 of the course, we release the information to access practice tests. So at that time, we actually encourage them to do one diagnostic test. Okay, so practice materials. So practice tests, practice materials. These are just practice materials that are not in the form of full-length tests. Already mentioned the 23 after-class practice set and the AMC question packs and the AMC session bank. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about the course format. So this is how the course works day to day and how students use the material and what they should be doing and why they should be doing it, and just gives them a better idea of how the course as a whole will function. So each 4-hour class, before class, we ask the students to read the assigned lectures. Again, the chapters in the study guides are called lectures, and complete the practice questions. I think there's 24 in each chapter in the exam cracker study guide. So hold up the study guide. And this is where they're learning the basic science. So they're just reading it through. Then they come to class. Each class is 4 hours and usually has 2 learning components. So it has some review covering the lessons in the classroom companion. So, so again, hold up the classroom companion. So you're still learning the basic science, but now you have an expert instructor to guide you through it. So a lot of the stuff here, reading into the study guide, you may not have picked up on as much as we would like. So now we have an expert instructor to take you through it, and the information should really sink in pretty deeply at that point. So once we've done that, so the lesson obviously reinforces the lecture in the study guide, and then right away we do some practice. So we cover a passage-based in-class exam in the study guide, and it also covers the topics that were in the lecture and in the lesson. And the objective here is to sharpen your reasoning skills and learning the test-taking methods to master the MCAT's passage-based format and focus on critical thinking. So really giving you exposure to the MCAT passage-based testing style, the passages, the questions, the answer choices, in every class, showing you the correct techniques and constantly reinforcing those techniques and helping you develop, refine your reasoning skills, which is what you really need to get a good score. And the in-class exams, we pronounce them ICEs for short. And the detailed solutions are at the back of each study guide, and there's one in-class exam for each lecture in the study guide. Do not skip in-class exams. So emphasize that to students. They're the most important classroom component of our prep course, again, because that's where you're going to work on your reasoning skills and your test-taking technique. Lessons are great. Yes, you need the science knowledge, but as we discussed, it only accounts for about 35% of your score in the sciences. And 0% of your score in cars. There's no content in cars. So in-class exams are the best opportunity to improve in the areas that will actually contribute to a higher score. So you do that in class, we do some review, we do some practice, and then after class, you have the option of doing the after-class practice passages if you want more, after-class practice sets, sorry, if you want more passage-based practice. And you put it all together and you get this 4-phase learning curve that is very powerful. So at home, you do the lecture and the study guide. Come to class, the instructor takes you through the topics that were in that lecture and the study guide. Right away, you do an in-class exam in the study guide that only covers topics in that lecture and lesson and tests your comprehension of those in an MCAT-style passage-based context. And then if you choose, you can even add another set of practice with the after-class practice set on the student portal. So again, it's a good blend of at-home learning and guided classroom teaching, and a good blend of review and practice. and you put it all together, it can have very powerful results for students. And we spent many years slowly developing this, this methodology. Okay, so that's the classes. Let's talk briefly about the workshops. So the science workshops are in the MedReels section of the student portal. And again, I already mentioned that we have instructors going through the question packs and the AMC section bank. Strongly encourage students to do those on their own first before they watch the videos on the MedReels on the student portal. We want them to tackle the questions on their own rather than sit there passively watching an instructor solve them. And then again, the CARS workshops are still in the classroom using the EK workbook. Most of this page just basically explains those points, that all the science ones are online, they're all 8 hours, they all use the question pack except for Psych Soc, which uses the AAMC section bank. And I believe there's actually a little bit of biochemistry in the section bank as well, but that's clear when they go on the portal, they'll see that. Do not skip workshops. Again, it's the same as the in-class exams. We're going to focus on tactics and traps and teaching them the correct techniques to use on the MCAT. And here it's spelled out in very stark terms. So the MCAT tests 3 skills: knowledge, reasoning skills, technique. The lectures and the study guides and the lessons in the classroom companions only focus on skill number 1. In-class exams and workshop focus on skills 1, 2, and 3. That is everything you need to know to excel on the MCAT. So this, in a nutshell, explains why in-class exams and workshops are as important as they are. A disclaimer here, CARS workshops are not part of the flexible schedule and do not repeat. So you should try to go to all of them. We simply couldn't fit in as many workshops into the 10-week schedule. So what we did is, it works, the weeknight class, and the weeknight workshop and the weekend workshop cover the same skill. So for example, it might be on mapping passages. So the Tuesday workshop is on mapping passages. The Saturday workshop is also on mapping passages, but they're numbered, let's say workshop 3 and then workshop 4, because they cover different passages. Even though it's the same skill, it's different passages. So it's still worthwhile to go to both. Same skill, but different content. Okay, on to some course features. So the practice test, which is a major one, we've got 13 computerized practice tests. 3 of those are official ones from the Association of American Medical Colleges. Mentioned that's what AAMC stands for. And anytime they see AAMC in front of any kind of practice material, that's their, by definition, the gold standard. Typical advice is to save these 3 tests to closer to test day, when you're really at peak performance, and you can see how you're doing at the very end, and to use the Altius tests earlier in the course. And it mentions here we recommend everyone do 1 practice test in week 3, and thereafter we recommend most students complete 1 full-length practice test per week. I almost wish I'd taken this part out, because we're actually encouraging students to hold off a little bit more, but for the time being, it's fine. There are 2 exceptions to this. Students in our course have all kinds of circumstances. So if you're a student who's doing nothing but studying for the MCAT, which is obviously the ideal situation, then of course you can do your readings to do 1 full-length practice test per week, and even do a full review of that practice test each week, and stay on top of everything else, and do some extra practice, and so on and so forth. But there are students who are in different situations. One of those would be that someone is working full-time, or even has a heavy part-time work schedule, or is a full-time or heavy part-time student over the summer. Or they have a weak science background, or in some cases, both of these. In those cases, we really encourage students just try to keep up with the course readings, and just learn the basic science, learn the basic techniques through the in-class exam and the workshops. And then later in the course, transition to focusing more on the practice test. We think that's a realistic approach from them. It puts them at a slight disadvantage, but that's just the reality. If you either don't have the knowledge or you don't have the time, there's really no point in forcing yourself to do practice tests early in the course and falling behind on the readings, or doing, hopelessly terrible on the practice test, because you still haven't learned most of the content you need in order to answer the questions effectively. Now, regardless of your circumstances, so even if you do have a science background and you are doing nothing but studying for the MCAT, students should be prepared to score very low on their first practice test. It means absolutely nothing. Remind them they're being compared against other students who completed all of their studying in the scaled score. So them writing tests early on in their preparation for the MCAT, of course they're going to do poorly. If they do well, that's a really promising sight, but they should be prepared and expect to do poorly, and they should use that to motivate themselves to work harder, not to be discouraged and not work as hard. Okay, so again, here it reiterates at the bottom that they'll get the information about the practice tests in week 3. Action plan for practice tests. So this is something new we're introducing this year. We're going to try to give students more concrete advice on how to use the practice tests, because it is a recurrent question instructors have been getting over the years, and we as a company have not done a good job of providing any kind of guidance to instructors as to what to tell students. So we're working on it now. We're hoping to have it by about week 4 or week 5 of the test, or maybe even week 3, depending on how simple we want to make it. I regret putting this much information into the course outline, but it still stands up, I think, and the general approach that we want students to take is we've recommended students sign up for a test date in mid-August. And we've recommended that in a number of different emails to them. So it was included as sort of a, important bolded red with multiple exclamation marks at the bottom of each email. In other words, give themselves at least 3 weeks or 2.5 if they go on the weekends from the end of the prep course to their test date. And for those weeks, just so they can just focus on doing practice tests. And we have a tentative plan that it works on a 7-day plan where you have day 7 off, though by that time they'll probably want to work on day 7. And the way that it works is you do, and it's be really careful to tell students, this is just a very early draft of a sort of basic template that we're going to work around, because we've got to come up with a whole bunch of different scenarios that accommodate all students' different schedules, students' different backgrounds. But the basic starting point would be on day 1, you do a full-length test, which is a full day, 6.5 hours. Day 2, you go back and review that test, and you identify the reasons for your wrong answers. Did you get it wrong because you have a knowledge gap? You simply didn't have sufficient knowledge to answer the question, in which case you need to go back and quickly relearn that particular part of the course or that particular topic. Was it a flawed reasoning? Did you make a reasoning mistake? You just didn't think things through properly, in which case recognizing it makes you less likely to do it again? Or did you exercise bad technique? Did you misread the question? Did you miss vital information in the passage that you should have picked up on? That would be something that would fall under, you didn't make a reasoning mistake, you just didn't extract the correct information in order to exercise good reasoning. Again, recognizing why you made your mistakes is critical to making improvements. And we'll probably also recommend that students identify the reasons for their correct answers, so they get a better handle on what they're doing correctly and they can make sure they continue those habits. So that would be day 2. And believe it or not, from talking to former instructors who've gone through the process of preparing for the MCAT, this is a full day to review your test, to go through every single question. Then on day 3, we recommend, and this is one model, that they find the 2 sections that they got the lowest scores. So on this full-length test, if you did poorly on 2 sections, let's say you got a lousy CARS score and a lousy Psych-Soc score, behavioral sciences score. On day 3, you find a different test and you just do those 2 sections. So you're working on your weaknesses. You're working on the 2 sections that you got the lowest scores. And then in the afternoon, you go back and you do the review. Again, you identify reasons for wrong answers, same thing, knowledge gap, flawed reasoning, bad text. So you try to figure out, keep practicing more where you're weakest, and then also do the full review of the sections where you're weakest. Now, if students are we're gonna have to adjust this because this presumes obviously that there are 2 sections, what if students have very balanced scores? In that case, we'd probably have them just do the full length test on day 3 and then review it on day 4, another full length test on day 5 and review it on day 6 and day 7 off. Anyway, we're working on this schedule, and then we've also got to take account of when students' test dates are, because unfortunately they're not all in mid-August, in which some of them are doing in early August, in which case they'll have to start this sequence while the course is still running. And we'll probably just have them do a day 1 and a day 2 each week. In any event, but this should give you some idea of some of the advice that we give to students, that it's not just about doing test after test after test after test. It's about going back and really thoroughly, critically analyzing how you did on that test and why you did certain things correctly and why you did other things wrong. Okay, so that's the coming soon action plan for practice tests. Instructors' emails, our instructors will give out their emails, and the main point is to email instructor to clarify something he or she said in class. Otherwise, use the online forum. Obviously, there's no point in posting something when instructor said in class on the online forum, because only that instructor will know why he or she said what they said. But for general questions, to use the online forum, because that students all across the country will see it, and typically they may share the concern. So there's a section here you should go through. It's fairly self-explanatory. If you have a question about something the instructor said in class, email your question to the instructor. If you have a question about the administration of our prep course, please email MCAT@Prep101. Don't post on the online forum. If you have a question about the administration of the MCAT, please email mcat@aamc.org instead of posting on the forum, because we have nothing to do with the actual administrating of the MCAT. So the online forum is really meant to be questions about course content, learning about the basic science or about technique, or about questions students are confused about why such an answer choice is flagged as correct on a particular question in the exam crackers books or in the classroom companions. The forum is meant to be used for course-specific, content-specific questions. After class practice sets, again, we're still on course features. Again, optional homework if you want even more practice passages on the topics covered in each class. Made a reference to the med reels. So the med reels have 2 components. One is the online lectures. So there's over 400 videos of instructors covering the lessons in the classroom companion. So if you leave class and you're still confused about something, you can go and watch it on the med reels. More commonly, it's used later on. So when you're studying over those last few weeks and you find you're getting, you got a question wrong on the one of the practice exams, and you want to go and brush up on your knowledge of that particular topic, you can go back to the med reels. And it's not meant to be a standalone course. It could be. I mean, we do know that some students do use it that way effectively. But it's really meant, the online lectures, the online lectures are meant to be a supplement, not a substitute for going to class. The other element of the med reels is the science workshops, and I've already talked about those. It's 150 on-demand videos with instructors working through practice passages in the AMC question banks and AMC section bank. No online workshops for CARs, as we we do them in class, and also EK holds the copyright for the book that we use for them, so we can't post that online. Another course feature is the free repeat policy, and I forgot to put the word unlimited here because that's the key component of it. So students who take our course are effectively registered in perpetuity. They can take our course as many times as they want. The only optional cost incurred by repeat students is for new course materials added since they last took the course. Again, they don't have to buy the new materials. We usually strongly recommend it. This year we're recommending students buy only the Chem-OChem Classroom Companion and the Physics Classroom Companion, because the updates that were made to those, though it turns out the ones to the Physics maybe were not as extensive to necessitate buying the new book, but in any event, we did recommend it to students, and they have the option to say no and just keep the old versions. This is important. New sets of access codes for the practice tests are not issued to repeat students. So if you take the course one summer, by the time you take the course the next summer, your access codes will have expired or will expire very soon. And we have nothing to do with that, unfortunately. That's the only downside to using the AMC and the Altius materials, is they set the expiration dates or length of use terms for their practice tests. So, so students should be aware that the practice test is something if they may need to get again next year if they don't use them up this year. And then so at the bottom here mentions here, as far as the free repeat policy, is we really are the only company with a truly unlimited free repeat policy. So we'll stick with students as long as it takes to get them to their objective. The other companies have all kinds of hoops you have to jump through. You have to attend at every class. You have to have done all the homework assignments. And even then, I think you're only given, it's either a 6-month or a 1-year limit, depending on which company we're talking about. Okay, access to course materials and course features. So we already talked about before the course, the students get a shipment that includes the 6 study guides, the CARS workbook, and the Prep101 Classroom Companion. So they should have 13 books. If they don't have 13 books, they should contact mcat@prep101.com as soon as possible so we can fill that gap for them. And then during the course, the materials come out in a bit of a staggered release. We don't want to overwhelm students right away with too much material. So, so we have a phased-in release. So students will get the course outline at the time you're doing the orientation. Instructors will be giving out their emails each time they teach their first class. The after-class practice sets and med reels are available in week 1. There may be a few gaps to fill, but for the most part, they're available in week 1. Instructions for practice tests are emailed in week 3. Instructions for the question packs and section bank are emailed in week 3. And also the online forum information is emailed in week 3, and the forum begins to operate in week 3. So everybody has a couple of weeks to just get their feet under them and get rolling before we introduce a lot of the heavy-duty practice materials in week 3 of the course. After the course, a lot of the course features continue. Because we didn't activate it for a couple of weeks, the online forum, we will continue to run it for a few weeks after the course. After class practice sets, students have access for 1 year. If they re-register, they'll get access again as a repeat student. Same with med reels. Again, the AMC practice test, the Altius practice test, the AMC question packs and section bank, they expire 1 year after activation, and there's nothing we can do about that. Okay, flexible schedule. So this section we're talking about the course schedule. So the flexible schedule, so each class is offered twice, and in Toronto U of T and Edmonton, it's actually 3 times. There's weekday morning classes, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, just in those 2 locations. Everywhere else, it's weeknights and weekends. And the key thing here is not only the students are aware of the flexible schedule, but they understand that they don't have to tell us when they're coming to class. They don't have to pick, I'm a weeknight student, so I can only go on weeknights. It's like they should just think of it as a menu. They can pick and choose whenever they want to go to class. So if they want to go Monday, Tuesday, and then Sunday, or Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Friday, whatever. If they want to go to all 6, that's fine. So the Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night classes are repeated Friday night, Saturday morning, and Sunday morning. And it usually looks like this. So Monday class usually repeated on Friday, Tuesday usually repeated on Saturday, Wednesday usually repeated on Sunday. But it is absolutely critical that you emphasize this at the orientation, usually. Because of instructor availability, we can't always make this perfect pattern hold up. And students who plan around that happening are making a mistake. Or if CARS is usually on Mondays, they start to think, oh, it must always be on Mondays, so I'll make plans on Tuesday, Wednesday of the following week because I know CARS will be on Monday. That's not the case. The schedule's all over the place. So we can't promise that particular structure will always hold up. And we've already mentioned the CARS workshops are not part of the flexible schedule. So if the workshop start at CARS 3. If this was CARS 3 here and CARS was here, the next one would be CARS 4. And again, as I said, it would be working on the same skill on both Monday and Friday, but using different passages. So we would recommend that you go to both CARS 3 and CARS 4 on the Monday and the Friday, if you can. But either way, you'll get the skill imparted because it's the same skill on both nights. Class times. So weeknights, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 5:30 to 9:30. Weekends, Saturday, Sunday, 10:30 to 2:30. Friday night is counted as a weekend, not a weekend class, or sorry, not a weeknight class. The Friday, Saturday, Sunday is the weekend portion of the course. And make a point of emphasizing to students, the Friday is 5:30 to 9:30. They make the obvious conclusion because Saturday and Sunday are 10:30 to 2:30. Friday will be as well. And every year we have a number of students who send us angry emails saying, I just realized I missed my class today because I went, or not that I missed a class, I guess, but that I needlessly went to campus Friday morning expecting class to be happening. And it turns out it's tonight. So you can address that in the orientation and that confusion won't happen. Okay, schedule exceptions. Those are just statutory holidays, no big deal. Thursday, students should be prepared for the possibility of Thursday classes. Again, it's usually a function of limited instructor availability. Sometimes it's to do with rooms, but 9 out of 10, it's instructor availability, and we just can't avoid it. So we try to avoid it, but we can't avoid it. So already in a few cities, a number of cities, we have Thursday night classes happening. So students should try to avoid making plans. I know it's unfortunate. The Thursday is the one supposed night, blank night. But if you're only going three weeknights, then you can do anything else on the weekends. And if you're going on the weekends, then you can block off Thursday too, just in case there's a class. We do post the schedules many weeks in advance. So hopefully that will be, avoid the problem. But again, students should not expect this perfect Monday, Friday, Tuesday, Saturday, Wednesday, Sunday pattern, and they should not expect that there won't be classes on Thursdays. Quick note about where do they find the schedules and locations. We've sent them a whole bunch of emails about this, so they should all know this already, but it's good to repeat it during the orientation. Just go to the website, click on locations, select your location. So here, this person selected Calgary in order to end up down here, and then click schedule on the top menu. And then it takes you down to how to read the online schedule. So it has the date here. It has the whatever's being covered and the time. At the time I took the screenshot, the locations and instructors weren't posted, but those will be posted by now. And so all the information you need is here. The location also includes a map. And this is the schedule that you should be using as well as an instructor. You should be following the online schedule. And then students should be cross-referencing the online class schedule with the class structure table. So if we're doing CARS 1, then and you can show them the class structure table. If you have your classroom companion with you, open it up to the first inside page, and it'll show the class structure table. So they clearly see what you're referring to. And all they need to do is cross-reference what's on the online schedule with what's on the class structure table, and it tells them what they read before class, what they bring to class, and what we're going to cover in class. So all the information is there, and that makes life very easy. And remind them now to pay very close attention to the class structure table, as there's lots of non-sequential exceptions. So for example, here's Biochem 1. You do, for your before class readings, you do tactics and traps in the classroom companion. Then you do lecture 1 in study guide 1, and then you do lecture 3 in study guide 1. So lecture 2 is held off for another class. So, and for example, in chemistry, we do in class 1, we do lecture 1. In class 2, we do lecture 7. So students get lazy and just assume because it says Chem 2, that means they should be reading chemistry lecture 2. It'll cause a problem when they show up to class and realize we're covering something completely different than what they were reading at home. Makeup classes, and there are almost always going to be issues throughout the course. An instructor is going to get sick, a classroom is going to be locked, or the campus is shut down for some reason. And we'll schedule makeup classes. That's often another reason that Thursdays are brought into play. And in extreme cases, we sometimes have to do makeup classes online if our local instructor is not available. But again, we try to avoid that. We've done it a few times over the years. We do pick an amazing instructor if we do it online. So for the most part, students are pretty happy and they get to follow from home and it's live. What to bring to class? So study guide, classroom companion, notebook, pens, provisions. Most classes only have 1 or 2 short breaks. I don't know, we're in so many different locations. We can't guarantee there'll be cafeterias or vending machines nearby. So students should plan to be fairly self-sufficient with food. If you're giving the orientation and you happen to be familiar with the building that we offer most of our classes at, you can maybe tell the students where the nearest food outlets or places where they can get snacks and stuff is. That I'm sure they would appreciate that. Positive attitude and picture ID. They should bring picture ID to every class because new this year, we're going to be taking attendance from time to time. There have been a few students who've snuck into our class over the last couple of years, so they get one of their friends' books, a set of books from the previous year, and they just show up and start attending class and nobody actually notices. Foolishly enough, they often turn themselves in by emailing an instructor or posting something on the forum, and somehow we realize this person's not even registered in the course. So what we're going to start doing this year, we're not going to do it every time, but we're going to start taking attendance, and we'll ask the students during the in-class exams, when they're writing the in-class exams, just to put their piece of picture ID up on the top right or wherever on top left, I guess, depending on if you're left or right-handed, of the table, and the instructor will be given a list of students registered in that location. And you can just, while they're writing the in-class exam, we'll just ask you to quickly go around and double check that everybody present is actually registered in the course. So that's something new this year, and that's why they should always bring their picture ID. If they don't have picture ID, we're going to have to make them go on Facebook or something and show us their profile and to verify their identity through some online profile, but hopefully that won't happen. Hopefully everyone will bring their ID. Where to find stuff, I won't go through this here, but this just gives them a good list of where to find the materials that are used in the course. Why do we use the EK study guides? You can read this here, and the same logic applies to the Altius practice test. Is really the consensus is they're the best out there, especially when you throw in the in-class exams. So we wanted to focus on putting together the best course in terms of the structure and features, and also to hire the best instructors and combine that with the best materials. We feel we put together the best course. Okay, some course guidelines and principles to take them through. We've already talked about some of this. Practice, practice, practice. Cracking the MCAT is very much a learn by doing process. It has been, some studies report that students who do well in the MCAT spend an average between 400 to 500 hours preparing for the exam. Maybe don't mention that now because you're just going to maybe freak out a lot of kids who don't have that amount of time over the next 12 months, and we should probably just take it out of the outline. And one thing we've added this year that wasn't there in previous years, our prep course includes an abundance of practice passages. In total, it's over 1,000, so it's the equivalent of 27 full-length MCATs. So we've given students the best practice materials and lots of them, so there's no excuse for them not to give this 100%. We've just continuously been adding to the amount. If you went back just 2 years, there was only 2 practice tests, no question packs, no section bank, no after-class practice sets. So we've really boosted the amount of practice material available to students, so they have an ample amount to work from. What to expect from your instructors. All of this is self-explanatory. I would mention the competitive auditions. Students are typically pretty impressed by that, and should be, because it is sort of an innovative and effective way to hire the best instructors. So explain your experience with the competitive auditions, that we really hire for teaching skill, not for credentials. Overarching principles. Here's a good time to get into the don't be too pessimistic and don't be too optimistic polls that we talked about earlier on. the two different types of student. And then again, also mentioning follow our advice and treat our strategies and tactics as a unified package, not a menu. Too many students pick and choose which tips to follow and which to ignore. So most students fall back on their old habits, though a couple of our techniques to go, oh, that's a good idea, I'll try that one, as opposed to having complete total buy-in, which is what we really need. They're going to find that their own techniques don't work, and they're gonna eventually come around to using what we advise. So why not just do it right away, or at least try it right away. If you find our techniques don't work, sure, go back to your old ways. I would probably say that, but at least give us the benefit of the doubt that we've been doing this for a long time and we know what we're talking about. And the MCAT is very different than any kind of test they've written before. Therefore, now is a good time to make the adjustments and buy in right away. So personal preparation, just a few points here. Hide your calculator for the summer. Another point, again, reinforcing the whole idea that it's really a thinking skills test. Don't get too hung up on the content. So certainly our impression is that students spend much too much time studying the science. Yes, you need to know the science, but they go over it and over it and over it and over it. They'd be much better to focus some of that time on practice. So practice will get you much further than memorization. So practice like a demon and use the tactics and traps that we train you. We're going to put a lot of effort into imparting these techniques to you. So it's really important that you follow them when you practice on your own, and that's where you're actually going to master them. Okay, the last part of the About Our Course section, we just quickly go through the class structure tables that appear on the first inside page of each of the classroom companions. So again, the online class schedule will only show Biochem 1, Biochem 2, but that's all you need to know that these are my before class readings, these are my bring to class books, and this is what we're going to be doing in class. And I've flagged a couple here to warn them again about these various inconsistencies where we kind of jump around a little bit because that, oddly enough, our instructors think it's a better flow than the exam cracker's own flow. So already mentioned in Biochem 1, we do lecture 1 and lecture 3. In Biochem 4, we do lecture 4 in study guide 1 and lecture 2 in study guide 2. So you have to bring both study guides, both classroom companions to that particular class. This is the one for cars. Again, cars, there's only 2 classes, and then we move into the workshops. And each workshop covers an even numbered test, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, which means the students can use the odd number test as extra practice. And they should also bring a standard notebook to class to write notes because there's not a lot of room in the workbook to write notes. So that's cars, chem, jumps around. I mentioned we go from lecture 1 to lecture 7, then back to lecture 2, then we do part of lecture 3, then a tiny part of lecture 3, then it goes lecture 4, 5, 6. Physics is fairly straightforward. Physics is where we cover the math on the MCAT, and that's covered in Physics 1. And then Psych-Soc is where we cover the research methods, statistics, and data analysis sections of the stuff that you need to know for the MCAT, and that we cover in Psych-Soc 1, and we come up with our own in-class exam covering that material because Exam Crackers doesn't have one, so it's the only in-class exam that's in the classroom companion. It's not actually in the Psych-Soc study guide. Okay, so that in a nutshell explains our course. So tell the students, let's take a 10-minute break now. Though I will not, I'm going to keep talking and go through about the MCAT right away. Obviously, you can pause this yourself. So let's go into the about the MCAT stuff. So tell the students, okay, you should have a better idea of the course. Now let's just tell you a little bit more for those of you who are not, don't know the MCAT inside out, which will probably be most of them. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, and some of our course will begin to make a little bit more sense once you understand a bit more about the MCAT. So the basics, what is the MCAT? Why does the MCAT exist? I won't go through. Why does the MCAT matter? You want to talk about this, that MCAT scores are used both pre-interview and post-interview as direct criteria to decide who doesn't and doesn't get an offer of admission. And to put it in the starkest terms, your MCAT score can make or break your chances of admission to medical school, especially if you don't make the cutoffs for the particular school you want to get to. And that's a pretty daunting thought, that the one test on one day can undo all the work you've done up until now, no matter how high your GPA, how stellar your reference is, and so on. If you don't hit the cutoffs, your application is dead. So take this seriously. What is the structure of the MCAT? Okay, so science sections test your knowledge of basic concepts. So there's 3 science sections and one, you call it critical thinking or critical reading section, the CARS section. And the science sections test your knowledge of basic concepts. Again, it's not advanced, with an emphasis on problem solving applications and critical thinking. Okay, and CARS section tests your ability to understand, evaluate, and apply information presented in written form. Usually short section, 3-4 paragraphs of text. So here are the 4 sections. Never really understood the weird why they do it this way, 95-10, 95-10, each of the sciences with 10 passages, 59 questions in 95 minutes. The CARS, 90 minutes, 9 passages, and 53 questions. In any event, that's the way that it works. And what we'll call the 4 science sections, this is the physical sciences, CARS, biological sciences, and behavioral sciences, because this is a mouthful and an earful. Okay, what is the format of the MCAT? Some kids, to your surprise, may not know some of this stuff, that it's computerized, it's passage-based, and that's what makes it a novel. One of the many things that makes it a novel challenge for most students is you're given new information that you have to make sense of first and then answer questions on that information. And some of the questions actually aren't on that information, even though some of the passage-based questions really aren't passage-based questions. I don't know if you need to get into that much depth now. It's 100% multiple choice, but the answer choices are typically a lot more tempting than you would see on an undergraduate exam or midterm, where so on the MCAT they've really planted particular wrong answer choices to catch particular kinds of mistakes that students, and those are the most common traps we'll talk about. Some of the terminology students need to be familiar with. What are passage-based questions? So the passage obviously is this lengthy chunk of text here. Question stem, and then answer choices. So there's always 4 answer choices. So terminology, passage, question stem, answer choices. A little bit about what is a computerized format. So this is the new format, the passage on the left, question on the right. And it does have a number of user-friendly features. You can highlight text, you can strike out text, and they've actually expanded these features so you can highlight and strike out in the passages themselves, and also in the question stems. You can flag questions you want to revisit later. So it's another reason that it's important to practice with full-length tests, so you actually get good at using these user-friendly computer features. One of the only downsides to the computerized format that most people are unaware of is that people tend to read a little bit slower when they read on computers, and it's also a little bit more tiring because you've got light emitting right in your eyes, unlike when you read off of paper. So again, building up your stamina by doing lots of practice tests is important. Okay, what is the MCAT test? So we've got a lot of themes that keep repeating here, but it's important that students understand this, and you can probably skip some of these themes on a few of these occasions. I'm mentioning them each time they come up. The questions in the 3 science sections are skewed towards problem solving, scientific reason, 65% over content knowledge, 35%, and this gives you the breakdown. So only this is your basic science knowledge. The other 3 are various types of either scientific reasoning, problem solving, or things like data analysis and statistical reasoning. And then the CARS section puts an even higher premium on critical analysis skills, 70% over basic reading comprehension. So you've got reading comprehension, and then you've got reasoning within the text, 30%, and reasoning beyond the text, which is the most challenging, accounts for 40% of the questions. And there's a little table here to show you the sort of thinking skills that are involved in the different sections. And so knowledge accounts, I've had a few people challenge my math on this, so I don't know that I'm stand by these numbers too too rigorously, but the way that I worked it out was 26.5 of your 2.5% of your score comes from knowledge, and 73.75% of your score comes from reasoning skills. Okay, at this point, you probably expect to study for the MCAT like you did for university tests and exams. Don't do that. Don't spend all your time going back and reading the study guides and going through the classroom companion. Use that as the foundation and focus on doing lots and lots of practice tests. It says here, the MCAT is primarily a skills test. If medical schools want to know your knowledge of basic science, they look at your GPA. If they want to know how you think under pressure, an essential skill for a physician, they look at your MCAT score. Okay, how is the MCAT relevant? So this section was put in here because some students almost resent the MCAT. They really think it's kind of, I remember this when I was preparing for the LSAT too, because I would hear this a lot and probably thought it myself at various times. You feel like it's sort of an arbitrary barrier that's been put up. You've done all this work to make yourself qualified to get into medical school. And now there's this last hurdle. They throw this kind of peculiar exam at you to make it a little bit more difficult for you to gain admission. Well, it's actually, they should think of it as the opposite. The MCAT is the best predictor of how you will fare in medical school. And then, by the way, that's also true of the LSAT. I was really struck in law school how the skills that we were using day to day in law school were reflective of what was tested on the LSAT, unlike what was tested in my undergrad courses. Undergrad courses provided almost no preparation whatsoever for law school, whereas the LSAT did test if you at least have the reasoning skills to be able to follow along in law school. So the MCAT deserves your respect. So your MCAT score is a better predictor of how you will fail in medical school and on the medical board exams than your GPA or anything else. It's the best predictor. So it's a pretty solid test, and it's been well designed over the years. Some information here about what if you have a bad day. For people who are really nervous, you can void any time during the test, and you can also rewrite the test. And in most cases, in fact, in almost every case that I'm aware of, the schools will either look at your more recent test or your best test. So there's no reason really anymore to void, because if you're going to rewrite anyway, if you do better, the better score will count, or if your more recent score will count. How do I register for the MCAT? And I'm really hoping when you do the orientation, everyone in the room will already have registered for the MCAT and will already have picked a date in mid-August. So they have at least a couple of weeks to do practice tests. If they haven't registered, they should register now and pick a date in mid-August. If they've already registered and they haven't picked a date in mid-August, they should try to change it to mid-August. And if that's not a possibility, then they shouldn't be too stressed out, because we'll come up with a practice test action plan that accommodates their circumstances. But it's still much, much better to write it mid-August and give yourself at least 2.5 weeks, more like 3, after the prep course in order to prepare for the test itself. A lot of information here I won't go through. So here's the test day schedule, which a lot of students won't be familiar with. The 4 sections: physical sciences first, then cars, then biological sciences, then behavioral sciences. So the total content time is a whopping 6 hours and 15 minutes. And there's all this administrative stuff too that can eat up a fair amount of time. It's not uncommon for it really to be about, sort of 8 hours from the moment you walk into the testing center to when you leave. But as mentioned down here, if you plan to be a doctor, you better get used to marathon tests. The licensing exams, or the boards as they're commonly known, are even longer. So this is good preparation for the long hours you undergo throughout your medical career, both in residency and also the future exams that you'll be taking for your licensing exams. In the next little part, we go through the sections. So take them through the physical sciences section first. It has a breakdown of the different topics. So the MCAT is much more interdisciplinary now than it was. The old MCAT was really just physical sciences and biological sciences. Geez, it's been so long, I'm having a hard time remembering. But anyway, and it's really the importance of certain subjects have been diminished, primarily physics and OChem, to a lesser extent GChem. Though frustratingly enough, the array of topics you're responsible for has not been commensurately diminished. So these physics, GChem, and OChem are not worth as much, but you still need to know pretty much just as much GChem, OChem, and physics. Plus, you need to know biochemistry and psych-soc now. So it's a much more comprehensive set of material to know. So this is the physical sciences section. One point here to mention, because it probably hasn't come up yet, the test is not entirely passage-based. Each of the section will have 15 standalone non-passage-based questions that we actually usually recommend students do first before they tackle the passage-based questions, so you don't need to get into that now. Quick look at the biological sciences section, which is almost entirely biology, with a little bit of OChem and GChem, and then a chunk of biochemistry, which you'll notice is also 25% up here. So OChem is really 15% here and 5% here, so it's only 20% out of 300% on the science sections. Physics is only here, so it's only 25% out of 300%. I should say 25 out of 300 on the science sections, and GChem is 30 here and 5 here, so it's 35 out of 300 on the science sections if you follow that math, whereas biology is 65 plus 5 there, and I think another 10 on psych-soc, so it's 80, oh no, 5, so it's 75 out of 300, so it's a quarter of the science sections, and biochem is 2 times 25, so it's a sixth. I really shouldn't be doing math on the fly because I probably got all of that wrong, but anyway, it'll give you a general idea of how things have been skewed. It's called the psych-soc section, but it's a lot more psych than it is soc. And then there's a little bit of biology, and that's mostly to do with sort of brain science and the science that's, the biology that's relevant to behavior, mental processes. And then there's the mighty cars section. So no prior knowledge required. So 9, not 10 passages, 53, not 59 questions, and no standalone. Everything is passage-based. And the passages themselves, you might want to mention, are from social sciences and humanities. They used to have questions on natural sciences and technology as well, but they dumped those just to make it a little bit tougher for the poor science kids. And okay, so we're now going to spend a little bit of time talking about cars because it's a bit of an enigma to most students. So we spend a bit more time of it on the orientation and also during the prep course. So what's unique about the cars section? So first of all, using outside information, which is all you do in the science sections is apply outside information that you've learned, is a proven score killer on the cars. You have to actually only rely on the information provided to you in the passage. Another thing to know about cars, it does not test basic reading comprehension, or at least not that much. About 30% of it they categorize as reading comprehension, and it definitely would not categorize it as basic. Fewer questions equals increased pressure to avoid mistakes, but perfection is not required. This is something we really want to hammer into students. They need to learn to guess and move on the more challenging questions, because you actually can get quite a few questions wrong and still get a competitive score. Longer passage equals more severe time constraints. So the passages are usually about 500 or 600 words, about double the length of the passages in the other sections. And they're pretty challenging to read. They're not meant to be entertaining so that you naturally follow along. And a lot of them have been doctored by removing content or rearranging the sentences to make it just a little bit more difficult for you. So it's hard to push yourself to pay attention and to extract the amount of information you need from the passage in order to answer the questions effectively. It's the most dissatisfying section. It'll make you very frustrated. You end up guessing a lot more than you would typically in the other sections. And you're also a lot less sure of yourself in terms of your answers being correct. So makes you a little bit queasy for the entirety of the section. And it is the one that puts the highest priority on being a very prudent guesser, because you're not going to get as much certainty in your answer choices as you will in the science section. So again, it takes a fair amount of time to get to learn those skills. So doing lots of practice tests, doing the exam practice workbook, doing the AAMC question packs are lots and lots of ways that you can enhance those skills. And it's the best predictor of performance on board exams. So it's the one section that most strongly correlates with how you do on the board exams. And that makes a certain amount of sense because it's the most pure critical thinking section of the test. Okay. Bad CARS advice is epidemic. So there's lots and lots of advice out there of how you can do better, and some of it's advocated even by some of the major prep companies. And we strongly encourage our students to take note of these things in this next page or two, and avoid, if they hear this stuff, ignore it. And you don't need to get in an argument about it, just ignore it. So first, don't try to cherry pick easy passages. So one prep company recommends that you quickly read through all the passages, which is actually a bit time consuming on the computer, and find the easy ones. I've yet to hear a plausible explanation as to what is an easy passage. I guess the best would be it's something that you're comfortable with. But the problem with that is it could be a really straightforward passage, but then the questions are absolute killers. So you can't really find an easy passage. It's just you're just going to burn up a lot of time, and maybe the first paragraph's easy, and then it gets super complicated after that. Again, just don't bother. Just do them in order, and keep it simple, and that way you don't have to confuse yourself by having this extra mission early in the process of trying to find these supposedly easy questions. Don't read the questions before the passage. This is a really common one where it's advised, read the questions, and then you'll know what to look for while you're reading the passage. The problem with that is, A, you're going to forget the questions, and B, even if you did remember them, you're not going to be digesting the material in the passage effectively if you're constantly struggling to remember what the questions were, and cross-referencing what you're reading back to that. You really want your undivided attention on the passage when you're reading it. You don't want to have the questions sort of dragging you down. Don't mess around with speed reading techniques. You want to be a deep reader here. You really want to read for deep meaning. Speed reading is the most superficial kind of reading. It allows you to get through the material very quickly and retain sort of a general idea of what was there, but certainly not to gain a deep enough comprehension of the material in order to answer challenging questions on the material. Don't mess around with memory enhancements. Again, you're going to take a lot of time learning to memorize material better. The CARS doesn't test your recall of information. It tests whether you understood the material and you can apply the material in different contexts. Don't highlight keywords. Some of the other companies recommend highlighting stuff. We recommend doing it when you're practicing, and we'll do it a little bit during the workshops just to point words out. But when you're actually writing the test, we recommend you don't bother you. It slows you down and interrupts your train of thought and the flow of the passage. And then the last one is don't skip one passage. One of the prep companies actually recommends, and I was shocked that even with the new MCAT and the lighter time constraints on the new MCAT, but it's not that new anymore, it's 4 years, but the 2015 forward MCAT, it does not have the severe time constraints of the old one. As far as I know, the other prep company is still recommending that students skip one whole passage. Don't do it. Now, if you do 10 practice tests and you find you never are able to do more than 9 passages, 8 passages, that's fine. You've been forced to accept the reality that you, for whatever reason, cannot complete 9 passages in the allotted time. Then you skip one passage so you can do the other ones thoroughly, but you don't start off with the presumption that you're going to skip one passage. So that's some of the stuff to avoid. Now there's just a few things that CARS is all about the author. We'll start talking about some of the ideas that we're going to be using during the course to make sense of the passages. What is the most important section? And again, it comes back to the mighty CARS. So the CARS is most important, both in terms of a percentage of your total score and in terms of its significance in the admissions process. So the one CARS section is worth 25% of your total score, and medical schools have, over the years, really shifted their emphasis to giving more and more weight to CARS over the science sections, because they believe it best demonstrates your intellectual dexterity, more so than anything else. So at present, McMaster only looks at your CARS score, and I could be wrong, but I believe Calgary also only looks at your CARS score now, and maybe Ottawa, but definitely don't quote me on that, the latter two. In other schools, Western has a higher cutoff for CARS than for the other sections, so basically everyone who gets in Western has to be a superstar in CARS, and I think that's also true of Queens. So it's a really, really important section, and unless you have a rare natural aptitude, you should spend about 1/3 of your practice times on CARS. It is really important, and it takes a lot of hard work to improve your performance. Most students will improve on the science sections with, I don't want to say minimal effort, but with less effort than it takes to improve on CARS. Therefore, you should expect to be spending more time on it. And one thing that may surprise students is, as I've said, we have an abundance of practice materials in our course, but if they should somehow run out, there's lots of other practice materials out there that they can get, the practice books of CARS materials, and we strongly recommend they get stuff, though we do say that they should get it from other prep companies so that it's being used embedded in a classroom. And you can find the practice CARS books in most university bookstores. The only thing we also say is ignore the advice. Just do the passages, but ignore the advice. Okay. Then you move on to scoring. All questions are weighted equally. Talk about raw score, scaled score. I'm going to skim through this stuff. I want to mention a little bit about this myth that there's easy and hard versions of the MCATs. There is, but not in terms of scaled score. It's all equalized out. So you can't get a lucky break and write a particular MCAT. And yes, it may be easier than the other ones, but the equating formula will offset that, so it'll all be balanced out. Or you can't get a raw deal by being giving a harder one, because again, the equating process will even that out, so you get a fair treatment. What's a good score? Composite score 512 will be very competitive. Balanced scores are viewed more favorably than lopsided scores, and that's especially true, of course, with a lot of schools having cutoffs, a minimum for consideration. So you can get a great overall score, but if you miss a cutoff for one of the sections, then unfortunately your grade score will bring you no benefit. So the preference for balanced scores is similar to the way that GPA is calculated. It rewards consistency. When you apply, there's usually a trade-off between MCAT scores and GPA, so you can get away with a slightly lower MCAT score as long as you're above the cutoffs if you have a higher GPA, and vice versa. And medical schools don't just look at your MCAT score and your GPA. I went to law school, and all they looked at, I think I mentioned that a bunch of times, it's just because it's a point of reference for me. U of T Law School only looks at your GPA and your LSAT score. 50% GPA, 50% LSAT score. They don't care. You could have won an Olympic gold medal and cured a disease. I don't think it would actually help you any in terms of getting in. Law schools have a much more enlightened process and much more holistic process that looks at all these different factors. But nonetheless, the three that are probably are almost certainly the most important are your MCAT score, your GPA, and ultimately, if you get one, your interview score. And then following behind that, it would probably be your clinical experience and your extracurricular, again, depending on which school you apply to. Do some majors do better than others on the MCAT? We threw this in it's actually very, very dated now. But surprisingly enough, in terms of who did best overall, biology majors and psychology majors, some of the standard science majors did, and pre-med students did the worst. This was on the old MCAT, which was scored out of 45. And English majors scored higher. And you'll see there's a lot of problem-solving courses up here: biomedical engineering, physics, electrical engineering, economics, maybe not so much, mathematics. English was brought up a bit because they do a lot better on the verbal reasoning section. And a lot of the memorization courses are sort of clustered down towards the bottom here, which again reinforces the idea that the MCAT is a thinking skills or problem-solving test. Some more information about the role in admissions that you may or may not want to go through. Talks a little bit about cutoffs, and also that they use the MCAT score twice, pre-interview and post-interview. Then we move into the section on the challenges on the MCAT, some of which may surprise students. So how difficult is the science on the MCAT? Not very. How difficult is the math on the MCAT? Not very. The only difference between the two is there's not much math, but there is a lot of science. So that should be reassuring to students. So there's a lot of material to get through, but it's not especially challenging. Most of it is at the first year level. Some of it is even at the high school level. One to flag here, again, striving for perfection on the MCAT is actually counterproductive. Students need to learn how to guess on certain questions and move on, because you don't have an infinite amount of time. And here's some of the other factors that make it. So I sort of jumped ahead of myself here. So if the science isn't tough and the math isn't tough, why is the test as a whole tough? One is the time constraints, no calculator, mental exhaustion, expect the unexpected, avoid perfectionism, MCAT speak, so you're dealing with a whole different sort of language and material from academic journals, very different than the basic textbook material you were reading before. Questions are more complicated, answer choices are more tricky. There's just a lot of the test itself, not the content, is what is challenging. Best, least wrong answers. It can be hard for students, and the idea that you're looking for the least wrong answer can sometimes drive students crazy. And distractors, those are the answer choices that are deliberately crafted to confuse you and to trick you, can make it tough. A lot of the times it's struggle with how counterintuitive so much of this is. And then lastly, you're up against pretty stiff competition. So take home message, take this very seriously and don't be overconfident. The MCAT is tough. Okay, then to wrap up the orientation, just a brief introduction to tactics and traps and this idea of deliberate practice. And deliberate practice is really about the quality of your practice being more important than the quantity of your practice. So if you're spending all your time just rewriting your notes and going through Classroom Companion and turning those into, cue cards and things like that, you're probably not going to make a lot of progress score-wise. You've really got to push and challenge yourself to do a lot of practice when you're ready for it, when you know the techniques that you're supposed to be using, and when you have the solid foundation of the science knowledge. At that point, you really need to transition to doing more practice material. And if you're doing poorly on the practice material, you need to do more and more of it. So we write down here, studying for the MCAT is hard work. Progress is slow and painful. There are no shortcuts. It requires you to develop brand new skills that can't be learned overnight. It all comes down to hard work and practice, 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 and then practice some more until you master the key techniques. Becoming an expert is a marathon, not a sprint. That really captures it right there. And we just talked a little bit about the importance of techniques. So we'll be using tactics and traps as sort of the catch-all phrase we use for the techniques that we advocate. Tactics being good techniques, and traps being bad techniques to avoid. And again, here, put it in pretty stark terms. Simply put, the MCAT tests your ability to write the MCAT. A candidate with well-honed test-taking skills almost always outscores one who knows more about basic science, but not so much about the MCAT. So technique can actually trump knowledge. But the most important thing is the good news, these test-taking skills can be learned, and that's what our prep course is all about. We'll devote more time to test-taking technique and critical thinking skills than any other MCAT prep company by far. And using our methods, you'll approach every passage with confidence, even if you're not familiar with the subject, which will often be the case. but you'll have done so many practice passages that it won't even phase you a bit that you're not familiar with it. We believe that practice makes perfect, and we've organized our course around this principle. And then you're done. And at that point, you encourage the students to read the later sections at home. We've thrown an appendix about the old MCAT that they may or may not want to read. The only reason we've left it in there is because there's still a lot of advice circulating that applies to the old MCAT. It can confuse students if they hear something that really isn't applicable anymore. And knowing a little bit about what the changes that were made in 2015 can maybe help avert that. So I don't know if they want to read it or not read it, or whether you want to advise them to read it. But anyway, I shall stop there. I appreciate your time watching this. I hope the orientation goes smoothly, and it should be a fun experience for you. You're exposing them to a lot of new information, so take your time. Obviously go much slower than I did. Yeah, try to make it fun for them, try to make it fun for you, and also try, of course, to make it effective. And if you need anything from me, I am at your beck and call. When I send this by email, I'll also have my cell phone number in the signature, and you can just text me and I'll phone you anytime. Thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.